Now, many of you have been watching the WWE on A&E specials. They've been doing these biographies. They've been doing these episodes called Rivals. I talked about the Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels episode of Rivals. I watched the biography on Goldberg, which was not the most recent one. I'm behind on everything, but the Goldberg one was from the previous week. The talking heads that they included in this special were Eric Bischoff, Hulk Hogan, Paul Heyman, who has become very good friends with Goldberg since he came back to the company. In fact, I think it was Heyman. Wasn't Heyman the one who inducted Goldberg into the Hall of Fame? I think that was something Goldberg requested. Jim Ross was interviewed, Bret Hart, David Schumacher, or Shoemaker. Is it Schumacher or Shoemaker? Shoemaker, right? What does he call himself? I don't even know what he calls himself. And Goldberg's wife, Wanda, was also interviewed for this piece. There was no one interviewed from the power plant where he trained, which they did get into in the biography to kind of comment on his training. There was nobody. They didn't interview any of those people. There was no Kevin Nash, who could have shed some light on his decision to, for the streak to end when they put the championship on him. That was around the time Nash had taken over, I think, as the booker in WCW. It was sometime around that period. So they were not interviewed. It was the usual talking heads that you would have expected. So they talked about Goldberg growing up. Some things I didn't know. I didn't know that he was the youngest of all the kids in his family by 14 years. A good old Jewish boy growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he talked about being bullied when he was a kid for being Jewish and beating up his bully one day. It was kind of reminiscent of the scene from the movie A Christmas Story, and he's pounding away on his bully. So he's recounting his youth here. And he talked about being a big fan of football and wanting to be a football player. It's all he ever wanted to be. Started for the University of Georgia, and his football career got cut short after some stints in the CFL. 14 games he played over the course of 3 seasons in the NFL for the Atlanta Falcons. And he got hurt. He had to bow out. He's sitting at home. And his accountant told him to get out and do something. You can't just sit on the couch all day. So he ended up getting involved in wrestling, and he ended up going to train at the WCW power plant. And they didn't talk about how he ended up there or anything. I think it may have been Sting and Lex Luger, I think, is the story, as far as them knowing Bill or seeing him and recommending that he go to the power plant, but they didn't get into any of that. So they covered briefly his training at the power plant. And Goldberg admits here in this special, he says, I did the wrestling to replace something that I loved. And I just hoped that it would fill the void of this thing that I love that I couldn't do anymore. And he said, it's not a slight against wrestling or the fans or anything like that. It's just true. He goes, I'm not a wrestler. I'm a football player. Now, Goldberg, when he debuted in WCW, if you are a newer fan who only knows of Goldberg from his most recent run, Goldberg was insanely over during the Monday Night War period. He was the biggest star that WCW created. And it was almost happenstance the way it all worked out. Nothing fancy about the guy. Black boots, black trunks, bald head, goatee, walking out to the ring. How many ex-football players have become pro wrestlers, right? He's one of a long line of them. But he just had a certain intensity about him, and he would go out there and he would finish these guys off in 30 seconds, in 1 minute, in 2 minutes. He would snort, he would spit, he would hit the spear, the jackhammer, and he'd hit the showers. And the more they did this, the more over this guy got. And to say that Goldberg never had any great matches in his career is ridiculous. I did a countdown many years ago of my top 15 matches in WCW history of the Ted Turner era of WCW. 2 of the matches in my top 15 involve Bill Goldberg. He was in the spot on my list for the Nitro match he had with Raven for the United States Championship when he won the U.S. title, and for the Halloween Havoc match where he defended the WCW World title against DDP. And you could say, well, Raven's an experienced guy and DDP guided him along. And that may be true, but he held up his own in those matches. I still tell people to go back and watch the Goldberg and Raven match from Nitro. Why would I put that match on my list? It wasn't like some long mat classic or anything. It's because it didn't have to be. The fans were into everything these guys were doing. When Goldberg hit the ropes and came off and caught Raven with the spear, the first spear, in that match, you see everybody rise to their feet in unison. The entire fucking building. Everybody rises to their feet. And they didn't sit down for the remainder of that match. And Goldberg is throwing people around. He gives a jackhammer to Ron Reese, who's this just gigantic guy. Pins Raven, wins the championship. Total dominance. But he was just over in a way that nobody else in that company was. And very few people even in WWE were. You could say Austin, Rock, that's pretty much it. And then Goldberg. Goldberg was their biggest star. He was their biggest creation. The man was intense. That's what people liked about him. He once speared La Parka, and La Parka tore his ACL on a fucking spear. Goldberg had no idea, and then he gave him a jackhammer and he pinned him. So I'm sure that didn't feel too good. If you go back and watch it, poor La Parka, he's holding his leg. He's like, please put me down. And he drops him and he pins him. The guy was like a raging bull in that ring. He was like an out-of-control raging bull. When he went to the Georgia Dome against Hulk Hogan on that Nitro, it was basically the WCW version of Hogan Andre. That was their Hogan Andre. Only this time, Hogan was playing the role of Andre. Hogan was in both matches. Big crowd though, 40,000 people in the Georgia Dome. No bigger star in the company than Bill Goldberg, just like in WWE back in '87. No bigger star than Hulk Hogan. This was a monumental match for this company, and it was almost as if they didn't know what to do after it was over. Goldberg did it. He beat Hogan. He took the title away from the NWO. This is what everything had been building towards now for years in this company. Where they went wrong with Sting, Goldberg picked up the baton. Now he wins the championship. This was 6 days before a pay-per-view. 6 days later, Hulk Hogan was in the main event. Bill Goldberg was on the undercard defending his title, I think, against Curt Hennig. They didn't know what to do with this guy. That was where he peaked, was at the Georgia Dome that night. But I talked about him being this raging bull. That brings us to Starrcade in '99. Now, they covered this at length on this show. They have comments from Bret Hart, who is not kind to Bill Goldberg. We all know what Bret Hart thinks of Goldberg. He is no fan of Big Bill. This was the match where Bret got kicked in the head, and he was concussed so badly, it went undiagnosed for weeks, which only made it worse, and ultimately ended Bret Hart's career. All of the matches and the potential, the comebacks that we were deprived of for Bret Hart, this great career that he had for himself. And it's a sin that his career ended the way that it did. It ended with a whimper. Because there was so much left for him to do in those last several years of his career, so many more matches and people for him to step into the ring with, and I'm sure he would have been back in WWE, I'm sure, a lot sooner than he was. And we were deprived of that because of the retirement, and then of course he had the stroke a couple of years after that. But they talked about the match, and they also talked about the figure four spot around the post. It wasn't just about the kick to the head. This is something that people neglect to talk about or just don't realize. Bret was hurt earlier in that match. Bret did that spot where he would put the figure four on somebody around the ring post. Started doing that in '97 in the WWF. And he says he told Goldberg what to do. He goes, when I do the spot, grab my foot so that I can slowly lower myself to the ground without smashing the back of my head on the floor. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Because Goldberg grabbed the foot, but then right before Bret went to go wrench back on the hole, Goldberg let go. He forgot. And if you watch that part of the match back, I would not at all be surprised if Bret Hart first got concussed on that figure four spot before Goldberg even kicked him in the head. The kick only made it worse. I would bet you anything that he says he got his bell wrong. I would bet you anything he got concussed on this spot. He said he was seeing stars. You could even see it on his face as he's got the figure four applied. He's got this look on his face like, man, he is not feeling good at all. Then we get to the mule kick. Goldberg goes to whip him into the ropes and says, watch the kick. At least he told him to watch the kick. But if you watch it back, Bret says he didn't know what he meant. He didn't know what kind of kick. And when Bret comes off the ropes, Goldberg is already right there. I mean, there's no room for him to... I mean, he tried to get his hand up, and he just didn't get his hand up in time because there was no room. It's like he came off the ropes and boom, the foot was already there. Kicked him right in the head. And that was the beginning of the end. Bret didn't know that at the time. He knew he was hurt. I don't think he knew that this was going to be the beginning of the end of his career, but that was, ultimately the mule kick that did him in. And then they cut to Eric Bischoff. And these comments made my jaw drop when I heard what he had to say here. Now, Bischoff, I've heard Bischoff talk about stuff before, and Bischoff sometimes sounds reasonably intelligent, like he knows what he's talking about. He's not a stupid man, but I've also heard some dog shit takes from Eric Bischoff. This takes the cake. He talked about Bret Hart. He's such a master in the ring, right? He's praising Bret's in-ring abilities, and he says because Bret was such a master, he knew what he was getting into when he stepped into the ring with Goldberg, because Bischoff had just got done talking about Goldberg being as intense as he is and a little out of control. He says Bret knew what he was getting into when he got into the ring with him. He said that Bret has to take a certain responsibility for what happened to him in the ring as a result of that. Now, Bret wrestled several more matches in the 2 weeks or 3 weeks after the concussion without knowing how severe it was. He wrestled Goldberg again. He wrestled Chris Benoit. He had a hardcore match on Thunder with Terry Funk. All without knowing how truly bad things were, and then shortly after that, he was forced into retirement. The one thing he said in his book that he told Goldberg before they went out to the ring that night was, "Don't hurt me. Whatever you do, Bill, don't hurt me. Just please don't hurt me." Because he knew how wild Bill could be. Goldberg didn't injure him on purpose. I don't believe that. And I do believe that Bill is genuinely remorseful for what happened. But for Eric Bischoff to say that Bret Hart also bears responsibility for what happened to him in the ring on that night, unless Bret called the spot himself, which he did not, I'm not sure exactly what Bischoff would have liked for Bret to have done. Should Bret have gone to whoever was in charge at that time and booking the show or writing the show? I mean, there were so many changes in management at that time in that company. I don't even fucking know who was in charge. Whether it's Russo or Bischoff or somebody else. Should he have gone to them and said, "I don't want to work with this guy. I refuse to work with Goldberg," and just throw the whole fucking pay-per-view into mass chaos? I'm sure that would have gone over real well with the management in WCW. So what exactly does Bischoff expect Bret to have done? I'm not entirely sure what the hell he's talking about, and I'm not sure that he knows what he's talking about. That is truly one of the all-time dumbest takes that I have ever heard. And I don't know if he honestly believes it, or if he's just getting back at Bret because Bret is always talking shit about Bischoff. They don't like each other. Bret Hart does not like Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff does not like Bret Hart. Bret Hart has said a lot of things about Eric Bischoff. You listen to the intro of this podcast every week. I have a funny Bret Hart soundbite where he is bashing Eric Bischoff. So there is no love lost between these two. I don't know if Eric honestly believes what comes out of his mouth, or if he's just saying that because he doesn't like Bret, and so any chance to kind of give it back to him, he's going to take it. But whatever it is, my jaw dropped when I heard that. I could not believe that comment would make it into this biography. Truly one of the dumbest takes that I have ever heard. From a man who should be smarter than that, and evidently is not. He is a fucking imbecile. Now, Goldberg told Live Audio Wrestling back in 2016, that was the year he came back to WWE. He told The Law, "That will forever go down in history as the biggest mistake that I have ever made in my entire life. For those who haven't heard me say it, I apologize profusely. Though Bret and I are very good friends, and he doesn't hold it against me, till the day I die, I'm going to feel bad about it, and there's nothing I can do to take it back." Now, if that sounds weird, that he would say that he and Bret are good friends, and he's been forgiven, it's because Bret has been a little bipolar about Goldberg over the years. At times, he has talked about Goldberg like he doesn't blame him, accidents happen, as if he has forgiven him for what happened. He's even signed photos for fans at conventions from the Starrcade match of Goldberg kicking him in the, not kicking him in the side of the head where the injury happened, but there's a different point in the match where he kicks him in the face. And he'll sign the autograph. Some people get Goldberg to sign it and Bret Hart to sign it. He has no issue, signing photos like that and stuff. But other times, and in more recent years, Bret has gone the opposite way, and he has completely buried Goldberg. In the special, he called him a zero. A few years ago, he even said WWE should induct Barry Horowitz into their Hall of Fame and remove Goldberg to make room for Barry Horowitz, because at least Horowitz never injured anybody in his career. And now you hear Goldberg, when he's asked about Bret Hart, Goldberg now says that Bret will never forgive him. Well, a few years ago, he said Bret did forgive him. And I can't even say he's lying, because it's possible that Bret did, but now he feels differently about it. So it is a little weird. I've heard Bret go both ways on Goldberg before, but he seems to have settled into basically the fuck Bill Goldberg mode. And Goldberg seems very over the whole thing. They talked about when WCW went out of business. He was one of the top stars who had guaranteed money from Turner, and he still had years left on his contract, and so he decided to take the money and stay home and wait for his contract to be up. He didn't know what he was going to do at that point. He obviously went and had that 1 year in WWE, which ended up being a disaster. Even though he became the champion during that run, it ended up being a fucking disaster. And that was it. He wrestled a little bit in Japan. It might have actually been before the run in WWE. I'm trying to remember exactly when he did the New Japan stuff. It was either right before or right after. And he seemed to, like working over there. But basically, when his WWE run was over, that was it for him in wrestling. Until, eventually, he met his wife. She was a stunt woman on set of the movie Santa's Sleigh that he was filming at the time. And he met her, and they fell in love, and they got married, and they had a son. And they talked about Wanda and Gage being the reasons why he wanted to come back to WWE in 2016, and why he agreed to come back. And that's a nice story for them to tell, but they didn't give us any details about how the whole return came about. Did he reach out to them? Did somebody call him? Did Vince McMahon call him? Did Triple H pick up the phone and call him? Did Bruce Pritchard call him? Did he send out feelers on his own? They completely glossed over that. He wrestled Brock Lesnar again, beat him at Survivor Series in 90 seconds and shocked the world. And things went so well that they put the Universal Championship on him. They took it off Kevin Owens, they put it on Goldberg, and they had a much better match at WrestleMania 33 than the one they had at WrestleMania 20. It was redemption for the WrestleMania 20 match. I actually thought that was a great match. Just 6 minutes, two big bulls going, head on. I thought that WrestleMania match was exactly what it needed to be. They talked about him going into the Hall of Fame in 2018 and, him being back and doing other matches and stuff. And, Goldberg's comeback, which was at the end of 2016, even though it's not been full-time, he's not, obviously a full-time performer, but his comeback has now lasted longer than all of the time that he spent in WCW, where he had his greatest success and his biggest run. And Goldberg now waiting by the phone. He told the New York Post recently, even though he just, that last match on his contract was whatever the last match was that he had. I guess it would have been the match with Roman Reigns. He must have some kind of, I don't know if it's a Legends deal or some kind of contract, because he was talking about how he's waiting for that one phone call. His shoulder is all messed up. He's put off having shoulder surgery because he never knows when the company may call on him. He's talking in this interview like he expects to be back in the ring at some point. I think we all know he will be. Certainly if Vince McMahon was still in charge. I'm sure Vince McMahon would pick up the phone at the first sign of trouble with an injury or something and call up Bill Goldberg. Let's get Goldberg back in the ring. Is Triple H going to feel the same way? I don't think Triple H was ever a really big fan of Goldberg back in the day, but this is a new Triple H, right? He's trying to build bridges now, not burn them. So it was a well put together special, but the Bret stuff and the comments by Eric Bischoff, I had to say something about that, because it's truly astounding to me that he would even make those comments in the first place, let alone if he honestly believes them. I think it says a lot about Eric Bischoff if that's how he honestly feels about that situation, that this guy who got kicked in the head and had his career ended, even though he kept wrestling and that made it worse, in the context of the match itself, that Bret bears responsibility for what happened to him is one of the more ludicrous things that I have ever heard.